In the latest developments surrounding the ongoing conflict in Ukraine, a significant proposal for peace has emerged from Ukrainian and European representatives during multilateral talks held in London on April 23. The proposal, reported by The Telegraph and later detailed by Reuters, outlines a comprehensive five-point plan aimed at establishing a ceasefire and addressing key issues surrounding the war. Central to this proposal is the call for a full and unconditional ceasefire to be enacted concurrently with immediate technical negotiations, a stipulation that indicates a push for a more structured approach to ending hostilities. The Ukrainian European proposal emphasizes the need for robust security guarantees for Ukraine, which would be provided by a coalition of European and willing non-European states. While explicitly rejecting any restrictions on Ukraine's military capabilities, this approach signifies a departure from previous peace frameworks that may have sought to limit Ukraine's defense capabilities in exchange for concessions to Russia. Notably, the proposal calls for the unconditional return of illegally deported Ukrainian children and detained civilians, as well as an all-for-all prisoner of war exchange, further highlighting the humanitarian concerns that accompany the conflict. In a parallel development, the U.S. has also put forward a 7-point peace proposal reportedly presented by Special Envoy Steve Witkoff to Ukrainian and European officials in Paris on April 17. This proposal includes provisions for a ceasefire and direct negotiations between Russia and Ukraine, but insists on Ukraine's abandonment of NATO aspirations while allowing for EU membership. Furthermore, it entails recognition of Russian control over Crimea, a clause that has raised concerns among Ukrainian officials regarding concessions that could undermine their territorial integrity. The juxtaposition of these peace proposals has sparked a complex dialogue among stakeholders. While both the U.S. and Ukrainian proposals aim to facilitate a ceasefire, the divergent approaches to territorial integrity and military sovereignty reflect the intricate political landscape. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky expressed skepticism regarding the effectiveness of pressure on Russia, questioning whether sufficient sanctions or measures had been proposed by Kyiv's allies to compel a halt to the onslaught. His sentiments echoed amid a backdrop of intensified Russian military activity, including a recent barrage of aerial strikes that resulted in civilian casualties in Kyiv. In a striking turn of events, Russian forces claim to have successfully retaken the Kursk region from Ukrainian control, an assertion bolstered by the alleged involvement of North Korean soldiers, marking their first acknowledgement of foreign troop assistance in the conflict. This claim, however, has been met with swift denial from Ukrainian officials, who insist that their forces remain engaged in the area, continuing operations against Russian positions in neighboring Belgorod. The situation in Kursk underscores the ongoing volatility of the front lines and the high stakes involved in the conflict as both sides vie for territorial control. As diplomatic discussions intensify, the ramifications of these negotiations extend beyond the immediate battlefield. The Kremlin's recent rhetorical shifts, including the portrayal of the war as a fight against alleged neo-Nazi ideologies in Ukraine, suggest an attempt to frame the conflict in a context that could justify future aggression against European states. This narrative strategy aligns with Moscow's long-standing objectives of undermining Western support for Ukraine while reinforcing its own defense postures. The potential for a ceasefire remains fraught with challenges, particularly as both sides continue to engage in military operations. The assassination of high-ranking Russian military officials further complicates the landscape, with accusations from the Kremlin targeting Ukraine for these acts, which could escalate tensions. As the situation unfolds, observers are left to ponder the prospects for peace amid ongoing hostilities and the complex interplay of military, political, and humanitarian concerns. The coming days and weeks will be pivotal in determining whether these peace proposals can pave the way for a sustainable resolution, or if the conflict will continue to claim lives and reshape the geopolitical landscape of Eastern Europe. In a rapidly evolving conflict that has drawn international scrutiny and involvement, the Russo-Ukrainian war continues to escalate, with recent developments highlighting the diverse and complex nature of modern warfare. On April 26, 2025 European officials issued stern warnings to former U.S. President Donald Trump against any notion of appeasement towards Russia, emphasizing the need for continued support for Ukraine as the war enters its 1,157th day. This comes in the wake of Russian attacks on civilian targets, which many world leaders have condemned as war crimes. The tragic strike on Sumy on April 13, where a missile attack resulted in 34 civilian deaths, including 2 children, serves as a grim reminder of the conflict's brutal reality. U.S. State Department spokesperson Tammy Bruce stated, "There will be no negotiations, no decisions, no agreements until this carnage stops," reflecting the sentiments of many in the international community who view the ongoing violence as unacceptable. Amidst this backdrop, Ukraine's military has been making notable advances, launching precision strikes deep into Russian territory, particularly in the Belgorod region. These operations have reportedly forced Russian forces into disarray, allowing Ukrainian troops to establish control over a significant area. The effectiveness of these strikes underscores Ukraine's tactical evolution and its ability to leverage intelligence and technology in its favor. Additionally, an intriguing trend has emerged on the battlefield. British Gen Z gamers are being recruited and trained as drone pilots to aid Ukraine's military efforts, under the guidance of a former Royal Marine. Known only by his call sign Grim, these young recruits are finding their skills in video gaming translate effectively to drone operation. Grim noted that the hand-eye coordination developed through gaming is perfectly suited for operating FPV first-person view drones, which have proven to be cost-effective yet devastating in combat scenarios. Kamikaze drones costing less than £400 each have been able to destroy battle tanks worth millions, he explained, highlighting the transformative impact of technology on contemporary warfare. Among the recruits is a 25-year-old politics graduate from Wales who goes by the call sign Cowboy. He expressed a deep commitment to the cause, stating, "I decided to come to Ukraine because this is something I have cared about for a long time. I want to be someone who works for what they believe in." This sentiment echoes the motivations of many volunteers who have joined the fight, driven by a sense of duty to uphold Ukraine's sovereignty against an unjust invasion. However, the British government has issued warnings regarding the risks associated with joining the Ukrainian armed forces, emphasizing the potential legal repercussions for those who enlist. Despite these advisories, the desire to contribute to Ukraine's fight against Russia remains strong among many British nationals, a sentiment shared by those who have tragically lost their lives in combat, such as James Wilton and Alexander Garms-Rizzi. As the conflict persists, the introduction of new Russian military technologies, including the recently deployed Banderol drones, raises concerns about the evolving nature of threats faced by Ukrainian forces. Military experts are still assessing the capabilities of these drones, which are reportedly being directed towards strategic locations, including the Odessa region. The ambiguity surrounding these new threats complicates the already precarious situation for Ukraine, as it strives to defend its territory and civilian population. In a diplomatic context, discussions around peace negotiations are fraught with challenges. Recent comments from Keith Kellogg, a former U.S. Army general and Trump's top negotiator, suggested the possibility of a partitioning of Ukraine reminiscent of post-war Berlin. Such proposals, however, face significant backlash and skepticism, particularly from those invested in Ukraine's territorial integrity and independence. As the conflict continues, the international community remains watchful, aware that the decisions made in the coming weeks and months will shape not only Ukraine's future but also the broader geopolitical landscape. The interplay of military strategy, technology, and international diplomacy will undoubtedly influence the trajectory of this devastating war, leaving many to wonder how and when this violence will finally cease. In a dramatic turn of events in the ongoing conflict between Russia and Ukraine, former U.S. President Donald Trump has called for a summit between the two nations, asserting that it is time to finish it off. This statement comes as tensions escalate on the ground, with Russia intensifying missile strikes against Ukrainian cities and towns, raising questions about the Kremlin's commitment to peace. During a recent meeting with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky in the Vatican, Trump expressed grave concern over the recent surge in attacks, including a deadly strike on Kyiv that resulted in the deaths of at least 12 civilians and injuries to around 90 others. In a post on Truth Social, Trump remarked, "There was no reason for Putin to be shooting missiles into civilian areas, cities and towns over the last few days." He suggested that these actions might indicate that Russian President Vladimir Putin is not genuinely interested in ending the war, stating, "It makes me think that maybe he doesn't want to stop the war, he's just tapping me along." This shift in Trump's rhetoric is notable as he has generally maintained a more amicable stance towards Putin, often criticizing Zelensky instead. In the wake of Zelensky's refusal to recognize Russian annexation of Crimea as part of any potential peace agreement, Trump has suggested that economic sanctions could be a necessary response to Russia's delays in negotiations. However, he has yet to implement such measures, leaving many observers questioning the efficacy of his approach. The backdrop to these developments includes Russia's recent claims of having expelled Ukrainian troops from the Kursk region, a declaration that Kyiv has vehemently denied. While Moscow insists it has regained control, Ukraine maintains that fierce fighting continues, underscoring the volatility of the situation. Reports indicate that the U.S. is exploring a peace proposal that might require Ukraine to accept certain territorial losses, including de facto recognition of Russian control over Crimea and other eastern regions. In contrast, Ukraine and its European allies are advocating for comprehensive security guarantees and a complete ceasefire before any territorial discussions can take place. Zelensky characterized his meeting with Trump as potentially historic, emphasizing the need for a sustainable peace plan. As the conflict drags on, the international community remains watchful, with calls for a more definitive resolution growing louder. The ramifications of this ongoing war extend beyond the immediate region, impacting global security and economic stability. As the situation evolves, the potential for a diplomatic breakthrough remains uncertain. The contrasting proposals from the U.S. and Ukraine highlight the complexities involved in negotiating peace, with both sides seemingly entrenched in their positions. The world will be watching closely to see if Trump's call for a summit leads to a meaningful dialogue or if the conflict will continue to escalate, further complicating an already dire humanitarian crisis. In a significant diplomatic engagement set against the solemn backdrop of Pope Francis's funeral, former U.S. President Donald Trump and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky met in Vatican City, marking their first face-to-face discussion since a contentious encounter at the White House in February. The meeting, described by Zelensky as potentially historic, comes at a critical juncture in the ongoing conflict between Russia and Ukraine, which has escalated since Russia's invasion in February 2022. During their brief but impactful 15-minute conversation in St. Peter's Basilica, both leaders discussed crucial issues surrounding the defense of Ukraine, the necessity of a full and unconditional ceasefire, and the urgent need for a lasting peace agreement. Zelensky characterized the discussions as very productive, emphasizing the importance of protecting lives and establishing a reliable peace framework to prevent future hostilities. In a subsequent post on his Truth Social platform, Trump expressed skepticism about Russian President Vladimir Putin's willingness to end the war, citing recent missile strikes on civilian areas in Ukraine. "There was no reason for Putin to be shooting missiles into civilian areas," Trump lamented, suggesting that the Russian leader might be tapping him along rather than genuinely seeking peace. He further called for the U.S. to consider alternative strategies, potentially involving banking or secondary sanctions, as the death toll in the conflict continues to rise. The meeting's timing was particularly poignant as it coincided with the Pope's funeral, an event attended by numerous world leaders, including French President Emmanuel Macron and British Prime Minister Keir Starmer, who joined the conversation for a portion of the discussion. Macron later reaffirmed Ukraine's readiness for an unconditional ceasefire and pledged continued support from a coalition of willing nations led by the UK and France. This diplomatic dialogue follows a series of intense negotiations led by Trump's envoy Steve Witkoff, who recently met with Putin to explore the possibility of renewed direct talks between Ukraine and Russia. However, significant hurdles remain, particularly regarding territorial concessions that the U.S. has proposed, which include allowing Russia to retain control over areas it has occupied, such as the strategically vital Crimean Peninsula. Zelensky has firmly rejected such terms, asserting that all occupied Ukrainian territories belong to Ukraine under its constitution. Despite Trump's optimism regarding the peace talks, stating that most of the major points are agreed to, the reality on the ground remains fraught with challenges. The Kremlin's recent assertions about military developments have been met with skepticism from Ukrainian officials, highlighting the complexities that still obstruct a ceasefire agreement. As the world watches these developments unfold, the meeting in Rome may represent a pivotal moment in the ongoing efforts to broker peace. The stakes are high, and with both sides at a stalemate, the need for a resolution has never been more urgent. Moving forward, the international community will be keenly focused on how Trump and Zelensky's discussions will influence the broader diplomatic landscape and whether they can indeed lead to a meaningful cessation of hostilities.